Welcome to Forbidden History, the podcast-style channel where we explore the darkest corners of history and mythology. Everything we share is carefully researched and fact-checked, so you get the real history. If you enjoy learning about the shocking, strange, and forgotten parts of the past, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and join the discussion in the comments. In ancient Greece, few names inspired more fear than Sparta. Unlike Athens with its philosophers and theaters, Sparta was a city built for one purpose: war. Every part of its society was engineered to produce soldiers who were disciplined, fearless, and unbreakable. The tool they used to achieve this was the Agoge, a training system so harsh and relentless that it has become legendary. To understand how Sparta made super soldiers, we need to look closely at the stages of the Agoge, the rules it imposed, and the extreme methods it used to harden boys into warriors. A Spartan child's training began the moment he was born. Newborns were examined by Spartan elders who decided if they were strong enough to live. Any sign of weakness or deformity could mean death by exposure as the child was abandoned outside the city. This first brutal step shows the mindset of Sparta. Only the strongest would be raised. For those who survived, childhood was short. At the age of 7, boys were taken from their families and handed over to the state. From this moment, their lives were no longer their own. They belonged to Sparta. The first years in the Agoge focused on breaking their dependence on family and teaching obedience. Boys were organized into packs known as herds, under the command of an older youth. They were fed just enough to survive, but never enough to be full. Hunger was intentional, designed to make them resourceful and clever. Stealing food was encouraged, but if caught, they were beaten mercilessly. The lesson was clear: cunning was rewarded, failure punished. The famous story of the boy who hid a fox under his cloak, allowing it to tear out his insides rather than admit he had stolen it, comes from this period. Pain and death were preferable to shame. Daily life in the Agoge was brutally simple. Boys slept outdoors or in rough barracks, often without blankets. They were given one cloak per year, whether in scorching summer or freezing winter. Shoes were forbidden. The hardships toughened their bodies and taught them to endure cold, heat, and discomfort. They learned to walk silently, to move quickly, and to obey instantly. Laziness was punished with beatings. Talking too much was also punished. Spartans were trained to speak with sharp, short sentences, giving birth to the word laconic, still used today to describe speech that is brief and cutting. Physical training was constant. Wrestling, running, swimming, and hunting filled their days. They were drilled in fighting with fists, sticks, and eventually weapons. One of the most feared practices was the ritual combat between boys, often staged before crowds. These contests were not games. They were savage battles meant to test courage and toughness. Blood was common. A boy who cried out in pain disgraced himself. The ultimate trial came during the festival of Artemis Orthia, where youths were flogged publicly at the altar. Many died under the whip, but to endure the torment without a sound was the highest honor. But the Agoge was not only about physical suffering. Spartans believed that cleverness and stealth were as important as strength. Boys were trained in ambush tactics, night raids, and silent movement. They practiced stealing without being caught, hunting without being seen, and deceiving opponents. The notorious Cryptia, a kind of secret police formed of young Spartans, took this to the extreme. At night, members of the Cryptia were sent into the countryside armed only with knives, ordered to stalk and kill helots, the enslaved population of Sparta. This served two purposes: to terrorize the helots and to teach Spartan youths how to kill without mercy or hesitation. Whether every detail of the Cryptia is accurate or not, the very existence of these stories shows how ruthless Spartan training was meant to be. Education was also part of the Agoge, but it was nothing like the schools of Athens. Reading and writing were minimal, just enough to follow orders. Instead, boys were trained in music, rhythm, and dance, but always connected to war. They learned songs that celebrated courage, loyalty, and death in battle. They were taught to march in step, to keep formation, and to sing to the beat of war drums. Everything fed into their ultimate purpose: to fight as a single, unstoppable unit. By the age of 12, the training intensified. Boys' hair was cut short, they were given a single garment, and they began military drills with real weapons. Older mentors, adult Spartans, were assigned to guide them, sometimes forming close, almost family-like bonds. These mentors taught them not just how to fight, but how to live as Spartans, never showing fear, never backing down, and always putting the state above personal desire. Even meals reinforced discipline. The Syssitia communal mess halls served the same plain food every day, such as the infamous black broth, a stew of pork, blood, and vinegar. To outsiders, it was revolting. To Spartans, it was fuel, proof that they were not slaves to taste or luxury. By their teenage years, boys were expected to patrol the land, endure long marches, and perform dangerous missions. Survival skills became critical. They learned to sleep on reeds, to survive with little food, and to endure silence. The Agoge created young men who could move like hunters, live like wolves, and fight like machines. One fascinating detail is that Spartans often went barefoot even as soldiers. They believed it toughened their feet, made them faster and less reliant on equipment. Small things like this show how Sparta stripped away every comfort to sharpen endurance. At 20, the young Spartan was formally enrolled as a soldier, though he was still under strict discipline. He joined a Syssitia permanently, eating every meal with his comrades and living entirely with his unit. Brotherhood was the heart of Spartan warfare. They fought not as individuals, but as a wall of shields and spears. The Agoge drilled into them that their own lives meant nothing compared to the man standing beside them. Cowardice was the greatest disgrace. A Spartan mother's words to her son were legendary: "Return with your shield or on it." It meant come back victorious or come back dead. Anything else was shame. Even marriage was secondary to the military. A Spartan could marry in his 20s, but he continued to live in barracks until he was 30. Husbands often snuck away to see their wives in secret, further reinforcing that the army came before family. It was only at 30 that a Spartan male became a full citizen, allowed to live at home, but even then, his duty to Sparta remained absolute. The Agoge succeeded in its purpose. Sparta's warriors became the terror of Greece. At the Battle of Thermopylae, when 300 Spartans stood against the vast Persian army, their training showed its worth. They held the line until the very last man, proving that the Agoge had forged soldiers who preferred death to defeat. Other Greek states marveled at the discipline and unity of the Spartans. Their reputation alone could make enemies hesitate. But the system came with heavy costs. Individual creativity was crushed. Philosophy, art, and free thought, the hallmarks of Athens, were almost absent in Sparta. Compassion was weakness, and even friendship was secondary to discipline. The Helots lived under constant terror, and ultimately this rigid system could not adapt to a changing world. Sparta produced the greatest warriors of Greece, but once their military supremacy faded, they had little else to offer. Their greatness was real, but also fragile. The Agoge remains one of history's most extreme experiments in shaping human beings. It took children and stripped them of softness, comfort, and individuality. It built them into weapons, disciplined, loyal, and deadly. We still remember the Spartans not for their art or their culture, but for their steel-like endurance, their ferocity in battle, and their terrifying ability to stand unbroken. In the pursuit of military perfection, Sparta succeeded, but it paid the price by sacrificing much of what makes life worth living.